Okay, so I'm going to give you what I think might turn out to be a whirlwind tour here today. I'm going to tell you what DBOS is and how it works, what's new in the version 2 of our TypeScript SDK. I'll give you a little bit of demo. I think some of you guys were promised some code, so I'll hit the code and then give you a little bit of information on good times to use DBOS and one of my favorite things, when not to use DBOS, so that we save each other some trouble. So what's DBOS? DBOS is durable execution made easy with available hosting and good tools and libraries. Durable execution, your code might want to sync state across systems. Programmers, we've all written something like this. We're pretty good at it. We can even do tests for it. You're supposed to buy something, maybe you reserve inventory, create an order. If the payment fails, you got to put it back in inventory. Or maybe the boss comes to you and says, no, that's not the way our company works. We're going to take their money first and refund them if there's no inventory. Anyway, you know how to write it, you know how to test it. But how do you simulate in your tests what happens if the machine that's running your code stops? If the payment fails, we're supposed to release inventory. But what if the system stops doing that? And there's a lot of different scenarios. Maybe the payment's exceeded and you forget to fulfill the order. Could just reserve inventory and stop. You don't want that inventory tied up forever. Testing all of those things in the event of a system failure is much more difficult than just making sure your code works in the first place. And hey, we got a pretty good database pedigree here in this company. Our solution is, why don't we use a database? So if you push the buy button, that starts a workflow. Reserve some inventory, that's going to reserve inventory in the database. But we'll keep track of the fact that we did that. So that we're keeping track of the code as it goes. And if something goes wrong, we can finish it. That's durable execution. We can always continue where we left off. Find another machine, start it up in the same place, let it finish. And as a nice little bonus, we do have an audit trail of everything that happened because we've been recording it in the database. There is a demo app for that specifically. That's our widget store. I'm not going to go over it today, but if you're interested, we have a kind of fun little app you can get either in Python or TypeScript and see the code and how it works. So we get this question a lot. Isn't this just a saga? And the answer is absolutely, it's just a saga. But in my lifetime, most of the things I've worked on are just rehashes of things that were invented in the 60s before I was born. Our job at DBOS is to make this as easy to do as possible with, good code, available hosting, and libraries. So as a coder, you might be used to just writing functions. I'm going to change the example a little bit. We'll look at this a bit later. But if I want to do a job, maybe I have to do the work, write down the result, and tell everyone that it happened. That's a pretty simple function to write. How do I make DBOS pick it up where it left off? I put in two decorators. One that says this is a workflow so that it knows to start tracking it in the database. And then another one here, DBOS step, on everything that is something that's supposed to be checkpointed as the execution proceeds. So that's it. As long as my code was structured nicely and I put these decorators in, DBOS knows how to pick it up where it left off. Now, durable execution is a somewhat popular term in the industry, partly because of the way distributed systems theory works. You kind of have to assume your steps have happened they'll happen at least once. If you send a message out to some external system and anything bad happens either on that system or yours, you can't really sort it out. That's not so easy. So you're guaranteed to, it'll try it again if it never heard back. So that's happening at least once. We get a little extra bonus here with DBOS beyond regular durable execution. We have transactional execution. Any step that writes to the database will happen exactly once. So you don't have to go look in the database and say, hey, did this thing already happen? No, because we keep a workflow record in the same database transaction with the data update. Transaction function, not much more difficult than a step function. So our set result function in our little workflow is just going to insert a database record with our result. Now, you might say, well, shouldn't I check and see if that database record is already there? No, you don't have to, because the workflow will not run it again if it already happened. Other situations a little more complicated. Maybe you want to run a workflow exactly once. I stole this out of a somewhat complicated application that wanted to make sure no matter which code path was taken, that a particular thing happened once, only got initiated once. If you can generate a workflow ID for the thing that you want to do, then DBOS will make sure that that function acts like it only ran once. There's a lot more information about how you communicate with workflows and how they, can report status back and send the messages as they progress. For that, I would recommend our tutorials in docs.dbos.dev and give you a lot more information. So another important part of DBOS is the available hosting. The DBOS Transact framework that I've been telling you about, you can run that anywhere. You run it on your laptop, you can test it, you can deploy it. Python has come. Uh, Python, TypeScript. They're resilient, they're observable by default. You can do those things anywhere. Put them in EC2 if you want. However, making a system reliable, that's only as good as the hosting it's on. DBOS will automatically restart workflows. That's only going to happen if you have something that notices that the machine went down and starts another one. And for that, we offer the DBOS Cloud, the serverless platform. Deploy with a one click, and your code just runs, and you only pay for it when it's running. So the other part of DBOS is, we've made this thing and given you a place to run it, but it still doesn't seem useful unless you have good tools and integration with other things you might want to do. And I'm going to hold that thought for a little bit because in version 1, we didn't do as well with that as we would like to have. So that's version 2. What's new in version 2? Easier code, use of DBOS as a library. Version 1, if you didn't use it, you didn't, I'll be quick. They were these context objects that you passed around, and then whenever you wanted to run a function, you would say context invoke and tell it what class and the parameters. Not as clean as we'd like. We did it in Python. It just seemed nicer to not do that. So in version 2, there's 5% less gunk. We took a production app and we cleaned it up so that you just don't have to say anything about context. It just remembers where you are. You say DBOS instead. 5% less code, and that has real code in it too. So what was left over was 5% smaller. Made it the way it should have been in the first place. And yes, if you have a V1 app, you can mix V1 and V2, no problem. Works great. So the second thing, and probably the more important one to people who are just starting out, is that you can use DBOS as a library and put it into an existing app. In version 1, we said, oh, maybe people want to host web functions, just serve it up on HTTP somewhere. So we gave you a little decorator that said, go to this path and, this is how that function will get called. And it has koa underneath it. Some people don't like koa. Why koa? I'm already using something else. Maybe you didn't want web stuff at all. Version 2, use it as a library. So if you already had an Express app, for example, and we have a template, you can just go get this. I copied it out of there. You register some URLs with the app, and then you start up the server in your main function with listen. If you want to do that with DBOS, just call launch star. You will need a config file to tell DBOS how to find the database. But all you need to do is in some of your Express handlers, put calls to DBOS to start workflows. Launch, when we see that, we'll automatically do any recovery of workflows that need to be run. And in DBOS Cloud, it knows to divide them up. But we didn't come here to talk about Express. Express, I personally feel, is popular because it was around for a long time. We're going to do something a little bit more fun today with a demo. We're going to use Next.js. So with Next.js, I have for you this little cloud scheduler. So it looks like a calendar, and you can put tasks on it. The tasks basically just go out to different websites and pull back a result and save them in the database. So maybe the first thing of my job is, it really should go out in the morning and tell me if the cloud is up. So it'll fetch the URL for the cloud and just make sure, oh yeah, look, it got back to me with what it always says. But, maybe it could do some other things now that my primary job of checking the cloud is done. Go get me a joke. Let's add that to the schedule. Well, we want to test it. I don't want to wait until it comes. Let's see what we got. Probably shouldn't do comedy live, but here it is. How much does a hipster weigh? An Instagram. Yeah, I think we need another one. Let's do it again. Test. Okay. Did you hear about the chameleon who couldn't change color? He had a reptile dysfunction. I don't think they're getting any better. Anyway, so there's some other things if you want to play around with this that you could add. Maybe you've got a use to put things in it yourself, uh, tasks that you'd like to have run and results stored. It's very extensible. That's why we'll go back and we'll look at the code real quick. So what is in the code? Well, first off, why did we use DBOS? Next.js is hosted in a lot of places. It's got strengths. You saw them. This React UI that looked pretty nice. Does server-side rendering for performance and server actions for convenience between client and server code. But why host it with DBOS instead of the three other places you could get it hosted? What DBOS adds to it is this databases and durable execution stuff that I was telling you about. A lot of the hosting for Next will not let you have anything running when there's no clients connected. We're offering here something that will run your tasks in the background. There's something that says, hey, there's a time that I'm supposed to wake up and do something and run something. So that's something you won't find in most Next deployments. We'll get to this a bit later, but support for WebSockets in a lot of the deployments, if you want to do something like that and get back to the client because it's completely serverless, there's nothing to do that and reach out to the client. You'd have to add another service for that, but we've got it. And then we'll look at the integration of APIs and how you can kind of do it in Next and it works, but we can make it even easier than Next. So DBOS part, if you go into the code, you're going to find just an array of tasks you can add. You could go get your own copy and add one yourself. It has a name, it has a URL it goes to, and you say, is this text that I'm supposed to bring back or HTML or JSON for display later? There's a piece of code that actually executes this. It would be really short, except for just trying to figure out if you're trying to get like the time out of an API or something like that, it'll pick out a field. So it's a little longer than it would have to be, but it's not too bad. It's mostly just a call to fetch to go get the URL. Then there's the workflow. Workflow, maybe you don't need it for an application this simple, but I want my scheduled task to happen and run to completion exactly once. So the workflow does this run task, which is a step. It sets the result in the database and or an error if you get an error, and then it notifies the listeners and sends an email. So that workflow, if any of those things happen, like if it does the fetch, but it doesn't write it in the database or doesn't send the email, it will finish. So why does that work? It's because we put these decorators, DBOS step and DBOS transaction, on as a wrapper around do task fetch. That makes sure that it happens exactly once. And the DBOS transaction will save the result exactly once. Again, you don't need to check anything. It will only do it once. Uh, Another piece of magic on the DBOS side is we put this DBOS schedule decorator on this function that if you know cron, that star, 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 star stuff means run this every minute. And then it consults the database and it checks to see if there's anything scheduled. That makes it dynamic so that someone could have added a daily repetitive task or something like that in between checks and it'll find it. But other than getting occurrences, it just for everything it finds, it starts a workflow and that will run in the background. So what about the other part, the React Next.js part? I mean, this is one of these wonderful things. It's just regular React. I don't know much about it, but if you want to have some for yourself, go ask ChatGPT and you'll have it this afternoon, if not in the same hour. A little more fun though is these Next.js server actions. So if you pick this demo apart, you find this add schedule action function that calls DBOS and schedules an item, say. But then you'll see in the React code, which is definitely going to be running on the client, that just a call when they click the button to do an add schedule. So if that add schedule is running on the server and the call is on the client, then Next.js must be providing something for you. And that's a server action to call that. Now, when I was making this, I had the idea that it would, as far as fun tasks to schedule, give me something to do when I'm bored. And I found this nice little board API thing out there. It suggested for me that maybe I should contribute to an open source project if I'm bored. Okay, good. Only problem was that particular API was down and still is today. It's not being hosted anywhere. So how would we host an API like that in DBOS? Well, if you want to do it in Next, you go make an action like we have, and then you go put a route TS file in the right spot in API board activity, say, that calls it. That's not too bad, but in DBOS, all we have to do is put that decorator in and give it a URL and it's ready to go. And when you do it the DBOS way, this is a pretty simple example, but it does do validation of the arguments and some other useful things for you. So yeah, try it this way if you don't like the next way. Couple of free bonuses. There's a little bit of code in there to send an email that uses a library. So, your little joke results, they'll come to you in the morning in JSON, unfortunately, but that's for ease of a demo. Uh, yeah, always sends an email. Easy to integrate AWS services. Another bonus, like I said, is WebSockets, something that wouldn't necessarily work. But in addition to WebSockets, what if you're trying to kind of see if anything happened in the database? If you got multiple machines working together on this or something else submits a database right, you would like to have that get triggered whenever someone writes to the database. So for that, there's this DB trigger decorator you can put on that will notify all the WebSocket listeners of a database change. And I heard it's even better with Supabase, but I didn't get to try it. You should check out our Supabase integration. We do, in all of our templates, encourage good practices. You'll see how to set up Jest and Lint and Git and stuff like that so that you're good and clean. But I think the best free bonus is that you get these traces. If you look at the trace here, you can see the run job thing that got cron scheduled. It ran a task. That took a while, and then it didn't take long to put it in the database. Took a little longer to reach out and send the email with simple email service. Yeah, just did that. I didn't write any code for that. That came along for the ride. So imagine you're inspired and you'd like to make your own. The easy way to do it is to go over to console.dbos.dev/launch, or if you go to our homepage, it's pretty easy to find, and you'll find the DBOS Cloud console. So I can go here and try to launch an app. And if you're doing that, this one's a TypeScript task scheduler. I've already got one. When you run that, you will find ways that you can manage it. You'll get the URL. That's where you go to access your app. You can view the application logs, anything that you spit out to the DBOS logger. You can download the code for the app since you launched it as a template. If you broke your app, obviously you should deploy a fix to it, but if you want to do it the cloud way, you could revert it. Lots of good things here. And that is where you will find the traces and things like that as well. So we can see that my run job took a little bit longer when I just did some of those tests. You can also, if you would rather start locally, pull down our code from our GitHub repository, just do an npm install and an npm run dev. You do need a database. If you have a local database, that will work. You can start one in Docker. We'll help you do that. Or we'll give you a cloud database to try. So when would I say you should use DBOS? So we did this ourselves. We tried to make our DBOS Cloud subscription use Amazon in their recommended way. And there's a lot of services necessary if you're trying to use Lambda and RDS together. You need SQS to make sure that things get redispatched and to sort of distribute them, I suppose, but mostly to get them redispatched. And then some other code to go right to the database later. You can do all that much more easily with DBOS because it knows things about taking API calls and writing to a database. I would go so far as to say, if you're using Lambdas to write to a database, you're doing it wrong. It's just not as simple. We have queues and stuff like that built in. It's very easy to see. It's all in one place. You just add a couple of words and it goes in a queue. It's familiar to the development language and tools. It's reliable, leaves off. It picks up exactly where it left off. It's secure the way we have it deployed. There's traces for auditing and debugging. And most importantly, it runs faster and it's cheaper than Lambda. Lambda is not designed for I/O bound things. It's got something there running and waiting. Whereas in a language like TypeScript, you can have these requests outstanding and have it go do something else with the CPU. Other cases that the people have good luck with, enterprise integration. We have a pretty famous customer quote about that, about how quickly they got their app to work. Reliable AI agents. Reliability is probably not the primary concern with people who are doing AI agents these days. They're just cool and they think it's fun to see it work. But if you wanted to do something real, like take refund requests, you might go check a database and things like that as part of your agentic workflow. Maybe you even have to get a human in if the refund is for something expensive. It would be a shame for something to happen in the middle of that workflow. You should probably use durable execution with your agentic workflow. I'm not going to cover it today, but if you did want to look at something like that, I'd recommend in our Python repo, the reliable refunds demo. It's not that involved, only 250 lines of code. As important, though, as when to use DBOS, I think it would save people a bit of frustration to tell them when not to use DBOS. If you have large static web content, that's probably not something you would use for DBOS. We are not a CDN. We're more coming at it from the other side. If you've got a very data-driven website, all the high frequency trading people show up because they want to learn about something new. Too much latency for that. So hopefully you learned a little bit about how to get started. The recommendation I have is go to DBOS Dev, sign up and launch an app. Or if you'd rather, go to our GitHub repo and please start if you would. And if you have questions, I recommend joining us on Discord. We've got people at least 20 hours of the day who will probably jump in and help you out.
If you have a workflow that's triggered off of a cron job that's already running, what happens if you update the cron job workflow, like a new version of it, or update the timing, and even perhaps with a new timing?
Yeah, there's a couple of good questions in there, so I'm going to pick the question apart a little bit. The first question is, what happens when I change my code, right? So when you change your code, we will continue to finish running workflows with the old code and start new ones on the new code, unless you give other instructions. So that plays into the question a bit. A second thing that plays into the question is with the scheduled workflows, we create a key and run that workflow exactly once. So the key is partly your workflow function, and the rest of it is the time that it was scheduled to run. So if your workflow is already running at a particular time on a particular version, that one will finish. None other one will go because of the idempotency key, that it will only run that workflow once. And I think if you put those answers together, that answers the whole question. If you start a new version of the code with a different scheduling interval baked into the code and a different function baked into the code, a new VM will start serving that code and it will use the rules in that code. And if it tries to dispatch a scheduled item that it shouldn't, because your time moves forward. But if it did try to start an item from the past, maybe fill in gaps or something, and make sure that past things got run, it would end up not doing it because it's already written in the database that it's been or being run.
Thank you. Let's see, other questions. A lot of them coming in. Sorry if I missed it, but is there a way to use DBOS hosted in my own AWS against any Postgres instance without having to call out to your cloud? First of all, the ability to call out to any Postgres instance, that's possible whether you're running on DBOS Cloud or you're running DBOS Transact anywhere you want. The open source library that Chuck demonstrated, DBOS Transact, that can run anywhere. And so you can use that to make your TypeScript applications durable and execute them anywhere. They just need a connection to a Postgres compatible database, which can also be any database you're hosting on premises or in the cloud or Azure or AWS or wherever. If you're running your code on DBOS Cloud, that DBOS Cloud actually runs on AWS, and you can connect DBOS when you start up a DBOS Cloud account and instance. It will provision a RDS Postgres database for you. But if you have a RDS Postgres application database you're already running, or you can swap that in for the instance that DBOS Cloud provisioned. Chuck, anything to add to that?
I would add to that the DBOS Transact library is open source. It's MIT licensed, I believe. So, you can do whatever you want with it. When you're doing local development, it doesn't talk to DBOS Cloud at all. You can just bring a copy down. You can see what's in it. You run all the demo apps on your laptop. And of course, if you want to host that, it just needs Node on whatever you're running for the TypeScript one anyway, or Python. Yeah, it's we can't help you as much if you're not in our cloud, because you got to figure out how to deploy it yourself. That's a bit of a tall order if you were just trying to do something quickly, but no, it's fine. It's open source.
I think that's it for now. We're running out of time. So we'll, if we didn't get to your question, we'll get to it offline, and appreciate everybody time today. Thank you for joining us. Chuck, thank you for sharing your expertise, and we look forward to seeing everybody at a future event. Thanks again.